Good morning, Algebra 2. We're going to be covering lesson 65 using the quadratic formula. So I want to review solving quadratics. There are three methods. We've covered all of them. One of the methods is factoring. And some people like it, some people hate it. Another method is completing the square. I don't think anyone likes that method. The last method is the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is my favorite, and the reason it is my favorite is because it works for every quadratic. Factoring only works for some. Completing the square is not fun, and it's a lot of steps. Quadratic formula, it works for every single quadratic, and so it is really nice to use. So since we are teaching this lesson 65, you can now, I give you permission that if you come across a problem that says solve by factoring, ignore and solve it using the quadratic formula. It's nice, and if you can memorize it, which you will need later, then it's fast, it works every single time, so this is the method to use. So let's talk about a quadratic in standard form. So standard form should be ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Notice where each of these is at. So for example, a will always be the number in front of x squared. B will be the number and sign in front of x, and then last C. Now these letters are important because they're in the quadratic formula. So here is our formula, and if you were here, you know there's a story and a song to help you remember it, right? And I'm sure it's all over YouTube, but I'll go over how I remember it. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So if you'll notice, those letters we highlighted have a place in our formula. B, back, a. That's how I remember it. B, B-A-C. Think of that as like the word back. A, I'll be back. A. That's how I remember the order. There's a story, and it goes like this. A negative boy couldn't decide, like plus I should go, minus I shouldn't go, to a radical party because the boy was a square, so he missed out on 4 amazing chicks, and the party was all over at 2 a.m. There's a song to remember this, but most importantly, you need to memorize this. You could also write this formula on the top of your homework. You could write it on the top of your test. That's not cheating. It's called mind dump. Like memorize it as soon as you get the test, write this formula down. So we're going to practice using this method. So number 1, solve 5x squared plus 2x equals 7. Now, first and foremost, we could factor this. But based on what I've seen, not everyone loves factoring, and you do have to think about a lot of like number sense. So we're going to do the quadratic formula. So first things first, the right-hand side must equal 0. So I'm going to do that by subtracting 7 from both sides. And then I'm going to rewrite it. So 5x squared plus 2x minus 7 equals 0. So as you can see, the first number here, that's a. So a equals 5. B, look at the sign in front. So that's a positive 2. And C equals a negative 7. So I'm going to plug that into my formula. I have a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, I like to use parentheses to plug something in, but it just works out better. So B goes first, so 2, B goes here. A goes after the 4 and in the bottom, and C only goes in one place, and that is the last spot inside the radical. So next thing, simplify the square root. So x equals -2 plus or minus. This would be 4. And you can enter it all at once, and that is what I suggest. I'm going to actually erase this. So using your calculator, enter this in your calculator. So 2 squared, can't see that, huh? -4 times 5 times -7. So that's how you would enter it. It's b squared minus 4 times a times c. Hit enter. I get 144. So this is now just 144. So everything in orange just became this. Okay? I'm going to move this up. All over, I'm going to simplify that. 2 times 5 is 10. Now, you must simplify the radical all the way. So if I'm looking at that, before I reduce 2 and 10, I cannot reduce 2 and 10 because I have 3 things. So you have to be able to reduce all 3 at once. So I'm going to simplify the square root of 144. That equals, x equals -2 plus or minus. The square root of 144 is 12 over 10. So let's write our 2 answers. -2 plus 12 divided by 10, and -2 minus 12 divided by 10. And we can talk about where I'm getting these, but I'm looking at the 2 different symbols. One is the plus sign, one is the minus sign. So I wrote each, and I'm going to simplify each. -2 plus 12, if you're going to use a calculator and do it all at once, it has to be in parentheses. So -2 plus 12. Notice that's in parentheses, then divide by 10. So make sure you're entering it correctly. Gives me 10 over 10, or 1. The bottom gives me -14 over 10, or -7 over 5. So x equals 1 and -7 fifths. Now I know that seems long, but I wrote out each step. Some of you don't need to, you don't have to write out every single step as long as you can see that there are 2 answers. So let's try the ones in our lesson practice. So if you have the book, I don't have the page written next to me, but we're going to do part A. And if you're new here, the lesson practice is the first part of homework. So this is on page, I'll go ahead and look it up really quick for those of you. This is on page 465. It says lesson practice at the bottom. Okay, so page 465. So part A, we're solving 3x squared minus 7x plus 2 equals 0. Now they already got this to equal 0, so I don't need to move anything. So number out front is A. Number in the middle is B, so B is a -7 because we're including the sign in front. And C is a +2. So I'm going to substitute that into my formula, which is a -b plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So b is written in the first 2 spots. So -7, -7. Then it goes a, c over a. Now really quick, I never want to see this mistake. Do you see that -7 squared? Do not enter -49. Never, 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 never. A negative times a negative. No matter what number is squared, the answer is always a positive because a negative times a negative is a positive and a positive times a positive. So please know that this will be positive. So let's simplify. X equals, that negative 7 becomes 7, plus or minus. And again, I'm going to enter all of this into my calculator. So 7 squared. Notice I didn't put parentheses -7 because I'm going to get the same answer. -7 times 7, -7 is the same as 7 times 7. So -4 times A times C. Okay, and I get the square root. You still have the square root. It's just we simplified what's underneath. All over 2 times 3, which is 6. So remember, you have to keep simplifying this square root. So now I have 7 plus or minus. Square root of 25 is 5 over 6. And I'm going to write my two solutions. 7 plus 5 over 6 and 7 minus 5 over 6. And I'm getting those two answers because there's two symbols, a plus sign and a minus sign. So I'm evaluating each one. So 7 plus 5 is 12. 12 over 6 is 2. 7 minus 5 is 2. 2 over 6 is 1/3. So I would say that X equals 1/3, doesn't matter what order you put them in, and 2. All right, part B. 9x squared plus 12x plus 4 equals 0. Now, if you can pause it, go ahead and identify A, B, and C. And then I'd like you to substitute it in to your equation. And then you can push play and see if yours matches mine. So go ahead, identify A, B, C, and plug it into your formula. -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So pause, do it, and then push play. So a is 9, 12, and 4. B goes in the first two spots, so 12, 12, then A, then C, all over A. B, back, B-A-C, A, all B back, A. That's how I remember it. B, back, B-A-C, over A. All right, now I'm going to simplify this guy, and I'm going to rewrite what I have. So X equals a -12 plus or minus, I'm going to enter that in my calculator, over 18. So I have 12 squared minus 4 times A times C. And I get 0. Okay, so let's talk about that. The square root of 0 is just 0. So I'm left with -12 over 18. You don't need this plus or minus. You don't need it. You could simplify it with it. It would be -12 plus 0, which would be -12, or -12 minus 0, which is still -12. So in this case, I have a solution that repeats itself, -12 over 18, which if I reduce by 6, that's -2/3. So it is possible to get a single solution. All right, so moving on. I'm going to do another example. From earlier, I think I've only done one. So number 2. I'm going to solve 4x squared minus 4x equals -7. All right, so if I want to solve this, remember, I need to get the right-hand side to equal 0. And you'll know why I'm going over this in a second. So I'm going to add 7 to both sides. And I'm going to rewrite this. So I have 4x squared minus 4x plus 7 equals 0. So here's A, here's B, and here's C. So x equals a -b, so a -4, right? Plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 4 times 7. Notice I didn't write -4 squared because it's the same as a +4 squared. All over 2 times a. So I'm going to simplify this by I'm going to enter this in my calculator. So 4 squared, right, or you could just put 16, minus 4 times 7. Whoa, I get a negative number. So that's going to kind of move things around more. So I get a negative 96 all over 8. So from here on out, the first 3 that we did were from Algebra 1. This is where the Algebra 2 comes in because we've talked about this guy here and what he does. So let's talk about that. And also, 96 is not a perfect square root. So I'm going to simplify the square root of 96. Now, I comes from the negative, and 96, we're going to find a factor. So let's see here. The factor of 96, if I take my calculator, 96 divided by 4, 4 times 24, I don't really like 96 divided by 16. Ooh, 16 times 6. Now, I know the square root of 16, which is why I chose this factor. The square root of 16 is 4. So I get 4i root 6. So that is what I'm going to write in place. This is replacing this. Okay? So I now have 4 plus or minus 4i root 6 all over 8. And now I can reduce these 3. I call it the triangle effect. You can reduce things in 3s because there are 3 parts to your quadratic. So x equals, I'm going to reduce everything by 4. So I get 1 plus or minus 1i root 6 over 2. Notice I did not reduce the root 6 because it's square root of 6, and 6 is not divisible by 4, and that's a square root. Then I have to write this separately. I'm going to write the real part, and then I'm going to write the imaginary. So 1 over 2 plus or minus I root 6 over 2. And that is my answer. So we're going to go back into our lesson practice and do C, D, and E. We're not going to do part F, in case you're wondering. All right, so here is part C. They'd like us to solve x squared plus 5x equals a negative 9. So remember, I need that right-hand side to equal 0. So add 9 to both sides. So I'm going to rewrite that over here. X squared plus 5x plus 9 equals 0. Now, I do have an invisible a. A is 1, b is 5, c is 9. So x equals a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, 2 times 1 is 2. Now I kind of simplified some things as I went. You don't have to do that, but I like to simplify as I go. So negative 5 plus or minus all over 2. So in my calculator, you could put 5 squared minus 4 times 9, or I don't need to put the 1. And I get negative 11. So I'm going to simplify this guy first, right over here. The square root of negative 11 equals I root 11. 11 is prime, but the negative produces an I. So here is what I have so far. Negative 5 plus or minus I root 11 over 2. Now, 5, 1, and 2 share nothing in common. So I would write my answer as negative 5 over 2 plus or minus, you can write root 11 over 2 I. So you can write the I first, like I root 11 or root 11 I. But those are our two solutions. D. So I have negative x squared plus 1/3 x minus 1/9 equals 0. Now you can plug everything in exactly the way it is. or you can get rid of your fractions. And to get rid of my fractions, I'm going to multiply by the LCD of 9. 3 and 9 both go into 9. So I'm going to distribute a 9 all the way across. And that gives me negative 9x squared plus 3x minus 1 equals 0. Now I don't have any fractions, and so now I'm going to plug these into my quadratic. So negative 9 is A, positive 3 is B, and that's C. So x equals a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Make sure you bring those negatives. It's a negative 9 and a negative 1. Got to be really careful in math. You guys be really, really careful how you write things. And then 2 times negative 9. All right, so I always simplify this guy first. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus over negative 18. So we're doing this first. We always do this first. So 3 squared minus 4 times a times c. Okay? Negative 4, 3 squared minus 4, or negative 4 times negative 9 times negative 1, and I get negative 27. All right, so let's simplify. I get negative 3 plus or minus. The I comes out. 27 is the same as 9 times 3, and the square root of 9 is 3, and on the bottom you have negative 18. So I'm going to rewrite this. I have negative 3 over negative 18 plus or minus 3 root 3 over 18i. And you could have reduced here, or you can reduce here. So my final answer would be a positive 1/6 plus or minus. I know this was a negative 18, but a negative divided by a negative would be a positive, and a positive, like, you don't need it. I know that seems weird, but you don't need it there. 3 over 18 is again 1/6, so root 3 over 6i. Whew, I know that's a lot of work. E. We are looking for the x-intercepts of part E. And so remember that x-intercepts, so if it asks you to solve by graphing, on Desmos, you're looking for the x-intercepts because those equal our solutions. So you could use Desmos for this one, but we're going to do it by hand. It's 8x squared plus 7x minus 100 equals 0. So 8 is A, positive 7 is B, negative 100 is C. All right, so now I have x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 7 squared minus 4 times A times C over 2 times A. And we always simplify what's inside. So x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root over 16. And I'm going to enter this in my calculator. So 7 squared minus 4 times A times a negative 100, and I get 3,249. Now, I'm going to see if that number has a square root. So the square root of 3249, and you can check that down here. The square root of 3,249 is 57. So this now equals negative 7 plus or minus 57 over 16. And I'm going to simplify this all the way. So I'm going to use this in the calculator. So 7 plus 57 is 64. 64 divided by 16, this is just 4. The bottom one, -7 minus 57, hit enter, divided by 16. This is -4. I messed up here. Hold on. Yeah, I messed up that one. -7 plus 57 is 50. 50 divided by 16 is 3.125. So I would say that x equals a -4 and a positive 3.125. That is the end of our lesson. I'll put the numbers to skip on your homework. Thank you.